Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Marshall Sanders back again, continuing the series on the White Matrix. And we are on the reparation section of my argument. Anyone who would like to continue a discussion not in this video, please contact me at Marshall H. Sanders on Facebook. Send me a friend request or send me a comment on the videos that you would like to hear, what you agree with, that you disagree with. And so now let's continue with this series. Yesterday I brought to this series some demands for reparations. I listed what the demands are and also what the price of those demands would be in terms of monetary. Well, to continue on the series, I want to use an analogy today, as I like to do. I received an email yesterday where I posted a story about how Donald Trump's niece, one of his niece, I should say, had written a book about him and how she, being a psychologist, diagnosed him as a narcissist and said that he was a compulsive liar and such other things that many Trump supporters would, to say the least, disagree with. And so one of the comments to one of my posts about the story, which I had not even commented on but simply stated the story of her writing a book about it, said she is a liar and a compulsive liar herself, and she only wrote the book for money. Which led me to reply, which is something that I've had a repeated theme in my series about the White Matrix. How it is all illusion, that a person cannot support the White Matrix with actual facts because facts suggest reality. But people's belief system without facts, which makes up the White Matrix, somehow believes it has some kind of ground, moral, and even logic ground that does not exist. So my reply to this gentleman was that I find it interesting that you, a person who's never met Donald Trump one day, not even for a moment, not even for a second, suddenly believe that you know the person whom she's spent thousands of hours with, that she's seen off camera, that she knows in front of the camera is one person, but off the camera is a completely different person. And so it's what I say to this gentleman, I say to so many of you also who are still in the Matrix. This does not address, of course, the ones who are out of the Matrix, of course, but only to those who are still in the Matrix. How do you believe you know the information that you know, when the information that you so-called know is simply an illusion that you see on television? Well, do you suppose that a person puts cameras in front of their faces and suddenly that's the person you really believe they are? I'm asking you to come out of the White Matrix, because your illusion is about to head straight to reality. And reality always wins in the end. But I digress. I said that I would continue on reparation demands, and these are demands. And how I was just speaking about the story of how we believe we know something without knowing anything at all. And generally, literally the opposite of what we think we know is being true. I'm going to continue with that theme. Now, many of you have heard of something called the Constitution of the United States of America. And until this day, you say to yourselves, the Constitution gives me rights. The Constitution protects my rights. But the question I have for you is that even true? Have you read the Constitution? Have you read the amendments to the Constitution? Well, to continue this series, I'm going to give an overview and even read some of the constitutions and, well, some of the amendments to the Constitution. And I will show you that what you thought you were getting, you were actually getting opposite. Did you know that prior to the 13th Amendment, which is the amendment to supposedly free the slaves, that prior to that every law, not practice, but every law went back to the Declaration of Independence and the new Constitution formed in 1788. Were you aware of that? Therefore, whatever was legal was in the law, and whatever was not legal was either not mentioned or was mentioned and agreed upon as not having protection on it at all. Let me read what the 13th Amendment actually did. The 13th Amendment literally abolishes slavery and involuntary servitude. I'm sorry. You're saying that that's not what it did? Or are you saying that's what it did? Actually, I wasn't finished, because that is not what it says. Let me put the entirety of what it says. It says it abolishes slavery and involuntary servitude except as a punishment for a crime. What does that really mean? It means that even though people knew that morally and lawfully slavery was not allowed to that moment in the United States, it had now been made legal to own slaves as long as you can find a criminal or criminality in the slave. What the 13th Amendment effectively did was legalize slavery and gave a framework on how to make a slave, an indentured servant, legal in America. So as one of my list of demands to repeal the 13th Amendment of the United States of America, it literally makes slavery legal. Did you know that? Or did you listen to the mainstream media and narratives and school idiots and liars to tell you that this actually freed the slaves? No. Slavery continued at least up until 1964 in a worse, legally protected way in America. Are you aware of that? Because of such amendments being in place. But I'm not through with that, by the way. So, did you know there's precedent of an amendment being repealed? If you're not aware, the 18th Amendment was repealed by the 21st Amendment. Rather interesting, isn't it? That at one point in juncture, they felt that the 18th Amendment is something that the American people could justify lawfully. But then they used another amendment, and rather than simply cancel out the old amendment out of hand, they kept it around anyway and just made another amendment canceling out the 18th Amendment. This amendment, if you're not familiar with it, 18th Amendment was the prohibited the manufacture and sale of alcohol within the United States, whereas the 21st Amendment repeals the 18th Amendment and makes it federal offense to transport or import intoxicating liquors into the United States and territories where such is prohibited by law. So, listen to this. Rather than take a law, an amendment, if you will, and say this amendment is entirely illegal and wrong, they choose the opportunity in the 21st Amendment to simply say, well, we're not going to repeal the law, but instead we're just going to make you understand the law better. Legal, demonic, white matrix talk. But what else is new, right? So, another thing we want to repeal is the 16th Amendment. You're asking me, and let me read what the 16th Amendment says. It permits Congress to levy an income tax without apportioning it among the various states or basing it on the United States Census. Simply put, something that was illegal for 100 plus years suddenly became legal, ushering in the IRS and the Federal Reserve Banks, which enslave all of the American people. So whites who have made such their money off of slavery, off of textiles, off of hard work and ingenuity, were all now bonds and slaves and can be criminalized in the United States under your own laws. This is in effect the time when whites became slaves in America, in part like their black counterparts. Now, I'm in no favor of any person being in slavery or in voluntary servitude, white, black, or otherwise. This demand to repeal this is in the interest of all people, and I do mean all, which is why I want to make that the demand in reparations. And finally, of those that need to be repealed is the last amendment. How many amendments do you think there are? Well, to answer the question, there are 27. 27 amendments, one repealed, and the rest, well, are subjectively added whenever they want to add it to the American people. In other words, it's a piece of paper that no one actually abides by. And I'm going to read those after I make this demand, restitution demand. I'm going to read the 27th Amendment. And I'm going to give you some information that you probably never, let's be direct, I don't think you've ever imagined or thought about concerning these amendments. 27th Amendment says it delays laws affecting congressional salary from taking effect until after the next election of representatives. What does that legalese talk mean? It means that Congress could basically do what they want whenever they want with money in terms of their own salaries. They can increase it, decrease it, do anything else. And even if you made a law to immediately repeal it, well, they'll get their money before they can leave, and there's nothing you can do about it. Incidentally, that law was passed in 1992. What is the significance of that? Well, there's a few different significant things about that. Number one, do you know when it was submitted to becoming an amendment? December 25th of 1789. That means that amendment was stuck in a house and denied by somewhat reasonable people who understood that was absolute tyranny. For 202 years, 223 days. Let me repeat that. 202 years, 223 days. This had been submitted as an amendment and had not passed because of the other acknowledgement of tyranny that would have meant. So if you wonder why whites, blacks, and others, especially you children of the White Matrix, why your country has gone to, well, lawlessness, is because since 1992, in the last 28 years, it has been completely 100% lawless. So everything else in front of it or behind it, well, we haven't been using our amendments anyway, so why not repeal them anyway? Or at least the ones which I just spoke of. Although the other ones have been ignored so much, what exactly and why exactly do we have them happen on paper anyway if we're not going to do it nor enforce it? So let me give you a brief overview of the amendments. For those who are interested, please go Google search or some other search and find the amendments, a Wikipedia search. Read the amendments and what they actually say instead of what you're told they say, and making assumptions like the one guy I was speaking about concerning knowing Donald Trump over his family member. Are you guilty of the same kind of oversight and believing you know something that you do not know? But let's read some of these amendments. Thing is, I agree with so many of these amendments if they're in practice. But the problem is they're not really in practice. Number one is the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition the government. Number two, protects the right to keep and bear arms. Number three, restricts the quartering of soldiers in private homes. Number four, prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures and sets out requirements for search warrants based on probable cause. I would love to see that revised, by the way, seeing how that is routinely broken in every possible way. But I digress. Number five, sets out rules for indictment by grand jury in eminent domain, protects the right to due process and prohibits self-incrimination and double jeopardy. I wish that were true. However, we all know that's not in practice true, though in principle we can certainly agree with it. Number 6, protects the right to a speedy public trial by jury, to notification of criminal accusations, and to confront the accuser, and to obtain witnesses and to retain counsel. The problem with that is that it's so routinely broken by speed traps and such other things, and even stoplight cameras and such other completely illegal contraptions, which denies you the right to confront your accuser. But I digress again. Number 7, provides for the right to a jury trial in civil lawsuits. Number 8, prohibits excessive fines and excessive bail, as well as cruel and unusual punishment. That is an utter lie. There are people who are in economic bondage or even thrown in jail for several years, paying as much as 10,000% of the original fine simply because they cannot afford it. So, good luck keeping the law. Number 9 states that rights not enumerated in the Constitution are retained by the people. Number 10 states that the federal government possesses only those powers delegated or enumerated to it through the Constitution. You mean the Constitution that they wipe your butt with every day? Interesting. Number 11 makes states immune from suits from out-of-state citizens and foreigners not living within the state borders, and lays the foundation for state sovereignty and immunity. I have much to say about that, but again, I'm going to digress for the moment, because to say that there is state sovereignty immunity while saying the federal government can intrude on it, well, conflict of interest. Revises presidential election procedures by having the president and vice president elected together, as opposed to the vice president being the run-up in the presidential election. This one should have been put in almost immediately, and I certainly agree with that. There was no way for the federal government to stay together when two people who had two entirely different ideas on running the government were constantly opposed to putting it together. Number 13, abolishes slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime. We've addressed that abomination of legalizing slavery and giving them a framework which to work by to criminalize black people so that you can put them right back in the chains you had just taken off of them. 14th, divine citizenship contains the privileges of immunity clause and the due process clause and the equal protection clause, and deals with post-Civil War issues. Number 15 prohibits the denial of the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude, which is another joke. Because if that literally did that, why do we need the 15th Amendment when we also still have the Voters' Right Act? That literally makes no sense, since they do not agree with either one of them. Number 16 permits Congress to levy an income tax without apportioning among the various states or basing it on the United States Census. We've just covered that one and why that needs to be repealed and removed. Number 17 establishes the direct election of United States citizens by United States senators by popular vote. Number 18 prohibits the manufacture or sale of alcohol within the United States, which was, of course, repealed by the 21st, as I spoke before. Number 19 prohibits the denial of the right to vote based on sex. This was in 1920 that this was made law. Sometimes we forget that women were not given the right to vote in this country also, and therefore made a second-class citizen. However, would it be not so easy to understand that they should have said, this is the right to vote for all white women, Because simply put, even after this was put as a matter of right to vote not based on sex, black women still couldn't vote. Number 20. Changes the date on which the terms of the president and vice president and of members of Congress end and begin to January 20 and January 3rd, respectively. States that if the president-elect becomes vacant, the vice president-elect is inaugurated as president in their place. Given a framework for when we kill the president, now that we have the power as these legal banking institutions to murder your leaders, we can also put the next puppet in play. Bravo, 1933. Introducing the same Nazism that was in Nazi Germany. Number 21 repeals the 18th Amendment, as we talked about before. Pardon me. Number 22 limits the number of times a person can be elected president. Number 23 grants the District of Columbia electors in the electoral college. Number 24 prohibits the revocation of voting rights due to the non-payment of poll tax or any other tax. Interestingly enough, yet they use that same taxing to put many blacks in jail and forbidding them to vote. And is this any coincidence that this was also written the same time as the Voters' Rights Act, therefore nullifying anything that the Voters' Rights Act gave to a person, the same way they did with Amendment number 13, by criminalizing a person and making sure they can't vote, so making 24 no good to people of color. Number 25 addresses succession to the presidency and established procedures both for filing a vacancy in the office of the vice president and responding to presidential disabilities. Number 26 prohibits the denial of the right of U.S. citizens 18 years or older to vote on account of age, which makes no sense when you think about it. They already made sure that a person can vote, and now it's about age and sex. This voting thing is really a priority in these amendments, aren't they? Too bad they weren't brought into practice. And 27 we spoke about before. Delays laws affecting congressional salary from taking effect until after the next election. There. These are the amendments, and those are the amendments, many of which I should say, I've asked as a reparation to repeal. Now, it's easy to go around and say that these demands which I've made concerning reparation are unfair, or they seem to be too much. I mean, after all, many have already stated before, blacks have received $1 or 1 ounce of justice for criminal activity. When is it ever going to end? And it's an interesting question to ask. And it's an interesting answer that I have for you. If you went swimming, you probably have a location that you want to go to and finish that swimming. Maybe it's an objective. You want to swim to the barge in the middle of the lake. And once you get there, you're going to get on the barge and sunbathe. And then, whatever your objective is after that, is you maybe get in the water and go swim back to the shores. Or maybe you'll go home and you'll read a book and get a glass of wine and such other things, and then you'll be at peace. You'll enjoy your day. Maybe get some rest, and then we'll start your new objective. Well, that is my answer to you. for those who ask that question of when will it end for this reparations and demands. You see, when the objective is completed, that is when it'll end. You see, the person swimming out there through the barge probably had other things they could have done, work, made it, other things, such other things. But those things were related to work and labor. And the black person is already both as slaves and former slaves and sharecroppers, and those who are thrown in jail for excessive penalties and crimes and such other illegalities have already done the work. And now it's the time for them to actually have an objective that has nothing to do with work. It has to do with submitting and obtaining an objective outside of work. In other words, there's a scripture that says, "You shall not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth," which means when an ox is out there and it's treading your field so that you could make a farm and grow your crops, as it's treading through those many crops that it says use its back to produce for you, the ox would at times stop and get hungry, of course, and start eating some of what it had mass produced for you. And many slave and idiots would stop the ox from eating, therefore enslaving the ox without mercy. So even an ox was treated better than a person of color. But I digress. And now when the black person, much like that ox, says, "We just want to eat some of what we labored for," well, this is not a time for work. This is a time to eat. And so when the belly of the ox is full, that's when the ox will go back to work. And when that day or that time period that swimmer could go to that barge and sunbathe as an objective, and then come back and have that book and that glass of wine as an objective, well, then that is their reward for their labor. Because they would not have reached that had they not worked to acquire that goal. So that, in my way of answering, is when reparations will be complete. When the black person is no longer in a situation where they have work to get paid for the work that they already finished, but when they can reach a moment, it will not be a forever. There'll always be a time where everyone, and I do mean everyone, has to go back to work. But since the beginning of our times in this country, we've never had as a people a day where we got to tread and then finish treading only to eat some of our labor. It's time to eat. And it's time for you who are in the White Matrix to recognize that you're eating yourselves. And soon there will be no ox to tread your fields. And there'll be no more fields. And all of the big barn of crops that you put into your barn, you will soon realize that you've eaten it all up. You have nothing. Because your illusion, your false reality, is about to be revealed as such. But if you come out of it now and enter into reality, reality will be harsh. That's true. I'd be a liar like so many of you are if I did not tell you the truth. But when you come out of that white matrix, when you come into that harsh reality of truth, you will suddenly be a part of a solution to create a better reality rather than the falseness of the white matrix. So, I'm going to continue with reparation demands. I'm going to expand them, of course, to those who also have not been given the rights that they said they should have been given as demands that for them to get rights to do so today. But we've covered the amendments. In the next video, I'm going to cover other reparations that must happen in America. Join me then. Until then, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And I'll see you in the next video. Shalom.